I lead our U.S. casino and gaming practice, and happy to be with you today. Basically, the general construct of this panel is just to give you various perspectives on the current landscape of the U.S. market. So I lead on the advisory side, financial due diligence and M&A consulting, basically. So I'll interject where necessary, but really having lawyer, regulator, and operator, you should have various perspectives on what they're seeing in the current market. And hopefully it will help you kind of navigate, because we have a lot of these conversations with people. So some of it you've probably already heard from me if you're in the room. But having the interplay between us, I think, is really important as you think through kind of, there's the strategic side, and getting regulated, getting licensed are all important. So just to start, I think, to give Frank's perspective on the current market and what the landscape is, I'll have him start. If you want to introduce yourself as you go, that's fine, instead of having a separate introduction. But Frank, if you could give everybody your thoughts, that'd be great.
Sure, thanks, Tom. Everyone, if you don't know, my name's Frank DiGiacomo. I'm a lawyer in the United States specializing in gaming regulatory, mergers, acquisitions, and all that's related to it. And as Tom mentioned, and as most of you know here, internet gaming in its purest sense is really only legal in now five jurisdictions in the United States, most notably New Jersey. Pennsylvania, where Susan is a regulator, has recently flipped the switch on iGaming, and by that I mean casino games online, internet poker. The other states, Nevada, Delaware, and West Virginia. But the real growth recently has been in sports betting and online mobile sports betting, and that all triggered off the Supreme Court decision last May, or May 2018, which then it took down the federal impediment, the federal law that prohibited states from moving forward and licensing and regulating sports betting, allowing them to do so, and currently 17 states in the United States have moved forward or are in the process of enacting sports betting legislation, and 12 of those specifically allow for mobile and online sports. So in comparison, sports, it's 3 times the number of jurisdictions that allow just iGaming.
So, I mean, we talk about it all the time, but it's very fluid, right? I mean, Tennessee yesterday, I think we said?
Tennessee just adopted regulations yesterday. And as someone on one of the earlier panels said, each state is almost its own country in that it sets the rules, it sets the barriers for entry, it sets market access, tax rates, and although there are consistencies in terms of suitability reviews, each state has its own set of rules.
And getting to the rules and regulation and state differences, maybe, Susan, you could give some perspective on kind of PA, what we do differently there versus other states, or what you're seeing on the regulatory side as people are thinking about coming to the U.S., what they might expect from a regulator's point of view.
First, to give you a little insight on who I am, I'm the Director of Licensing for the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. I was the first employee of the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board, and I'm a lawyer by training. I'm the former 2-time president of the International Association of Gaming Regulators, and I'm also an adjunct law professor teaching gaming law and regulation. And to tell you a little bit about Pennsylvania, we are the second largest commercial gaming jurisdiction in the United States, and we're number 1 in tax revenue. And that is a banner that is sometimes not appreciated by the operators, but gaming's been very successful for the state of Pennsylvania. As Frank was saying, the regulatory landscape in the United States it's important to understand that it is not a market. The U.S. is not a single market. It really is 50 different jurisdictions. And the regulatory scheme that a company will face when it comes into the United States is really dependent on what jurisdiction it enters. And it's very important for companies as they enter a particular jurisdiction to read our regulations, read the authorizing statute, and to talk with the regulator to understand what those nuances are. All of the regulators are aimed at accomplishing basically the same goals. We want to make sure that our operators are suitable, that we have people with the requisite character, honesty, and integrity doing business in the state. We want to make sure that our operations are suitable and that the proper internal controls are in place regardless of what vertical the company is in. We want to make sure the games are fair and that the customer is going to be paid out if they win, and that the payouts and the rules will be followed and adhered to. We want to make sure that our taxes are paid and our fees are paid and that the companies are accountable for those matters, and we want to make sure that there are protections in place for the vulnerable. How we do that, how we all accomplish those goals is different, and it's important, I think, for companies considering coming into the United States to get involved early and to form a relationship with their regulator.
Yeah, I think we've said that. I mean, we talked about it this morning as well. I mean, getting to know and having those conversations in the early stages is one of the best pieces of advice that I think you've just said it, but we give people, because you don't want to be behind the eight ball when it comes to that. Are there any differences or anything significant state by state that you think is relevant? Or I know they're all trying to get to the same thing for fair play, but do you see a lot of differences, whether it's in the licensing process or the things that you've learned kind of from, whether it's New Jersey or anybody before you that we do? I just want to give that perspective to say, yeah, well, this state we're known to be very, is there anything, advice you can give to the audience on major differences state by state?
I don't know that I would say that there are major differences. I think that who is looked at from a licensing perspective, that can vary. What the technical standards are from state to state can vary. That's a very difficult question to quantify. There are nuances between the states. We all have different authorizing statutes. We have different policy goals that our lawmakers have been trying to accomplish, whether it's job creation or raising taxes or creating a tourist destination out of their jurisdiction. And those policy goals are going to help shape what the regulatory scheme is going to look like. So the devil's in the details, and in order to understand what those differences are, you really do have to dig into the particular jurisdiction.
And right before we get to Jeffrey, from an operator's point of view, from a gaming company or marketing affiliate, just the license, the various types of licenses and requirements, just a little bit of that flavor, whether it's the CPA license from a vendor standpoint, but are there the requirements there, how hard are they, how similar are they to the gaming companies themselves, or from an operator standpoint?
We have a licensing hierarchy that we apply in Pennsylvania, and I think that this would be true of any jurisdiction you'd come into in the United States. At the very top of that hierarchy is going to be your casino operator or your sports wagering operator or your interactive gaming operator. And then you move down that hierarchy, with the next being your game creators, which we consider manufacturers, but they can go by different titles in different jurisdictions. And then you continue to move down that hierarchy, and you get into an area that we refer to as non-gaming service providers. That's where we've slotted in our affiliate companies, these marketing companies, and we look at them in two tiers. If they receive a revenue share, we are going to license that company through a certification process, which is our lower level of license, and it will require individual applications from owners, officers, and directors, as well as the company itself. And in our jurisdiction, we look at any 20% entity ownership interest in that company. The rules will vary depending on what state you're in, but I know New Jersey also has a two-tiered approach to affiliates. And then in our jurisdiction, that certification applies on the revenue share side, but on the cost per acquisition flat fee arrangement, we would bring you in as a registered gaming service provider, and that has a somewhat lesser level of scrutiny, though it does still require an application and disclosure of the various owners, officers, and directors of the company.
Okay. So, Jeffrey, from an operator's point of view, I mean, we went through some regulatory and licensing, but I guess it'd be nice to get your general view of the landscape, per se, like in the U.S., and what your company's kind of looking, when you're going through kind of a strategic look and strategic rationale on where to go next, and how the evolution of the U.S. market looks, just to get your perspective on that from an operator's perspective would be great.
Sure. By way of brief introduction, my name is Jeffrey Haas. I'm the Chief International Officer for DraftKings, which is the world's leading daily fantasy sports operator. I manage our business in Canada, across Europe, and in Australia. We took a decision early on to focus on U.S. sports wagering, and in 2017 took a decision that we're going to start investing and coming with a path to market in the event that the federal law changed, and it did, which allowed us to take a bit of an early mover advantage, which we've been able to utilize over time. Today, we are a licensed sports betting operator in 7 states in the U.S. We operate retail sports wagering in New York, Mississippi, New Jersey, and Iowa, and mobile sports betting in Indiana, New Jersey, West Virginia, and the great state of Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
You're welcome. As Susan said, there are nuances and differences between each set of regulation and technical requirements in every state where we operate. And that varies from internal controls on exactly how advertising is approved, how any type of individual is allowed to check data in accounts, how marketing occurs, et cetera, across different channels. And we also, there's a great variation in the format and frequency of reporting, and a lot of technical attention needs to be paid to ensure we get those right. Because sometimes the long tent in the pole after licensing and full technology review is making sure that the regulator has access to the reports they want, at the frequency they want, et cetera, and just dotting the I's and crossing the T's can sometimes take a little while.
So it's been a long time since my audit days, back 02 to 07, when I was developing the Sarbanes-Oxley program for Tropicana Atlantic City, but that to me sounds like there's a lot of kind of build from an operator's perspective and controls that need to be tested and processes put in place. Is there, like, has that had the infrastructure of your own company had a significant, like as you go into different states, kind of build out that piece of the pie, or is it stuff that the states are doing and testing on their end? Is it more yours or theirs to control those processes?
We're under significant scrutiny by a lot of regulators in America now, as well as internationally. We're ISO 2001 certified. We go through extensive security testing, both internally and externally, to ensure our systems abide by all the appropriate requirements. It is a huge investment. I would say that the largest growing area of our business right now is probably around our compliance function to ensure that we're on top of all this.
And this is semi-self-serving because I am in the M&A space, but it's always interesting to me to figure out what shoe is there to drop next and how everybody, I mean, there's a lot of different layers like we talked about earlier, right? Like the tech companies, the B2B, B2C, the sport, the data piece of it. There's a lot of different angles and there's a lot of different companies that play in the space. I mean, we were traditionally a land-based casino operation in the U.S. So has there, maybe, Jeffrey, I'll just put this back to you. Is there any thoughts from what you're thinking about that from a merger acquisition, like of iGaming companies coming in and looking at land-based operations, land-based operators coming in and thinking to bring that in-house? Because right now we have JVs and a lot of different kind of agreements between the land-based, because like Susan would tell you, or like in PA, how we have, if you have a land-based operation, you need a land-based operation in order to have the iGaming license. Oh, I know you might want to correct me on that. There might be one, but I'm not 100% sure if it's not. But is there, what's your perspective on that from an M&A on where you see things kind of in the future?
I think there are a lot of opportunities out there. We're always interested in having discussions with other companies about any type of relationship. And we're watching the industry and the landscape like everybody else. You know, there are some very big deals out there, but some of the smaller ones are also very interesting, particularly in Europe, where there's long track records of people building great products and finding a way to provide unique value to consumers. You know, some of these companies are doing extraordinary jobs with what their businesses are.
To interject, I think the European companies with their technology and their expertise are vital to successful products in the U.S. What the U.S. has that's unique, at least from my perspective, is there are different brands, and those brands have they're highly recognized brands such as DraftKings and FanDuel, and you overlay that with the leagues, the professional sports leagues trying to get a seat at the table, and now the sports media companies trying to get seats at the table in the U.S. and to somehow be involved in this. You've seen it with the Fox Bet model done through Stars Group. Other sports media companies are are trying to understand how they can navigate through the regulatory process and strike that balance, but also to monetize the operational side.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing that Frank brought up to me earlier. I thought the leagues were kind of out of the picture at this point because the integrity fees and them trying to get a slice of the pie up front. But you mentioned now there's different, I don't know if it was Tennessee, but if you can elaborate on that.
Right, so the professional sports leagues initially opposed the legalization of sports betting. In fact, they were the parties adverse to the state of New Jersey in the Supreme Court litigation. But since the early states such as New Jersey and Pennsylvania moved forward without the leagues, but the leagues have been lobbying the other states as they develop legislation to, as you said, initially under the guise of an integrity fee, now it's a data access fee. So you have states and legislation that mandate that operators use the official data from the sports leagues, and that comes at a cost. Hopefully it's just a negotiated cost, but it's an extra cost to the operators going forward in these other jurisdictions. It's probably the reason why states such as New York have not moved forward with online yet, because the leagues have a very powerful presence there with all their offices in the state of New York, and are lobbying to have a relatively large piece of the pie.
Yeah, as some of you have asked me that question on how to get that market access, that to me is what I see as one avenue to where, especially with the consolidation that we've seen over the past couple of years of regional-based casinos, that there's some pretty large footprints. Now, with those footprints, they have access to more states as they unwind, but there's a lot of companies that have, and not just companies that think bigger casinos, but maybe stuff that is more kind of more similar to the casinos that I've seen in Europe, or card rooms, as like Colorado and Washington. Like there's more access that way, whether it's through JVs and partnerships. But I wanted to share that. That's one of my thoughts on how market access may be derived, at least on the operator side, and then figuring out the licensing requirements on who was really operating the casino versus to have an operator in place for the land-based, because there's no way to have that real vertical integration. I think the land-based operators weren't used to the space in iGaming and sports betting. And the sports betting iGaming companies really don't know how to operate or weren't in the business of running a casino, right? So I was wondering if that's going to be a place that people end up going to, or on how to get that market access. But I think if my mental clock's right, even though I don't see the time up here, that kind of puts us at the cusp. So we'll flip it over to, if there's any questions, and if there's not, you can certainly track us down the halls. But if there's anything, I guess just yell, or Mark will find you with a microphone.